open the public hearing, City of Red Lodge fiscal year budget, 2019-2020 budget. We'll open it up to the public. If you have something to say, come up to the podium, give us your name, your address. And we are going to keep this as a civil meeting, no name calling, no accusing. Let's just keep it to the facts, please.
I'm not shy, I'll be the first one. My name's Deb Ronick. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees for the Red Lodge Carnegie Library. My address is 9 Moonbeam Lane, Red Lodge. That's 2 words.
I hate to cut in, you got 3 minutes.
Right.
Sorry.
I would like to encourage the council members and Mayor Larson to reconsider funding an emergency amount for salaries for the Red Lodge Carnegie Library. As you know, we have someone that is ill. She's on leave indefinitely. She has sick leave, but that still impacts the budget for the library. The trustees were able to loosen up $2,000, but that still results in a drastic cut to service hours for the library. I regret that Jody Moore is not here today, unfortunately, but her son has back to school night, as many parents do tonight. If you have any questions that I can answer, or any of the other people can answer, I would encourage you to do that. I really hate to see these hours be cut. It will impact services, it will impact the community, and I think for a small amount, we can avoid that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb.
My name is Lee Cooper. I'm president of Red Lodge Friends of the Library. My address is 410 South Platte. I think the thing that disturbs me the most is what seems to be an attitude of not support for the library. I've heard it said that, why don't you just not buy any books? I've heard it said before, do we really need a library? And so I would ask all of you to consider how important is the library to you and to this town, and act accordingly, because to cut the library hours is significant and diminishes the library. Thank you. I'm Hope Smith, 517 North Hauser, Red Lodge. I was on the library board 10 years ago. At that time, we received $70,000 from the city council. 3 years ago, we received $48,000. We now receive $28,000. And that's in 10 years, it's gone down. Our prices have gone up. Salaries have gone up, everything's gone up. So it's really hard for me to understand why the library's not seeing the support that it used to see in this community. In our budget this year, or in the budget for the library, I say our because I feel like it belongs to all of us. But in the budget for the library this year, they requested an additional 8 extra hours for the assistant librarian. That was denied. It cost $1,500 to do that. Every year, the library budgets as closely as they can to, I mean, there are no extras. And they're sometimes in the surplus, but that doesn't get to go back to us. That surplus that the library gave back to the general fund would have paid for this additional salary that we need for a short time. Again, like people before me have spoken, please show support for the library. It impacts a lot of people. Thank you.
Beth Hutchinson, 219 West 12th Street. I'm interested in the library, but I'm also interested in the larger problem that has been brought back to attention by one of the librarian's illnesses. And I thought it had been addressed, but I was wrong. So you have people who are retiring, you have people who are ill, and you don't have the money in the bank to cover our commitments. And I have a couple of questions. If we were to find an alternative source of money, is there any problem during the year to adding that to the budget?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. And then the other question I have is, whether a study has ever been done on securing money from VRBOs and Airbnb use, because I have heard conversation from time to time in meetings, of neighborhoods that feel they're impacted, one way or another, parking, various things. And I work for the census right now, and I've had to go to places that are VRBOs, and I've had some interesting experiences trying to track down information from these people. So what I'm wondering is if it's worth appointing a committee to explore this area for the purpose of securing extra money that would be dedicated to building a fund that's solely for the purpose of covering people who have a lot of sick leave, a lot of other time built up, who may be retiring, because one way or another, we keep getting caught over and over. And I see the opportunity existing in terms of these places being businesses. I'm not sure if they have to have licensing as business licenses right now. They do, okay. And that having a tax on them could be a bit of a challenge, trying to figure out how to trap it. I think maybe it could be done via water usage as an entryway. But I think it's really worth having a committee look into this and see what could be done in creating a dedicated fund.
Hi, everybody. I am Jen Bells. I'm at 709 Hagen North, where I'm currently the recipient of some new water lines, so thank you. I have 3 points to express today. One is that I feel like the public process for budget review this year has been insufficient. 2, what could a useful process actually look like? And 3, where do we move forward from here? I want to acknowledge that drafting a budget, especially when cuts need to be made, is difficult. And most of us have household budgets and understand that when cuts need to be made, there's only so many line items where you can actually take that money from. And so the goal is not and cannot be to please everyone, if we understand that that's a fool's errand. But as long as the city commits to a participatory process whereby all of us as residents can convey what our particular priorities are, whether it's the library or other, the pool, other things, that's the part that's important to the process. And we need to be able to do that with an informed opinion. We need to give you our prioritizations with an informed opinion. But to get that informed opinion, the city has to contribute to a good faith effort to inform all of us about the details of the budget. Collect that feedback from all of us about what our priorities are, and then actually use that analysis and that feedback to inform the budget. And while the community has asked for this process, and I know that some council members have also asked for this directly, a charitable view of the city's actions could be interpreted as attempting to conduct that process. It's my opinion that attempt has not been successful, and the consequences of that failure undermine the public trust and undermine the ability for this council to do its job well. I believe for these reasons that the city should act to implement a review process that includes resident feedback in a meaningful way for this year and for every year after this year. So what does a useful process look like? I choose to believe that this body and the mayor and the council wish to be transparent and encourage meaningful participation from the public. So if we all have the same goal, which is to come up with the best budget we can that reflects community priorities while also paying attention to the reality of the constraints that we have, what would the process look like? Some of us attended a presentation by the city last month here, which included an information session on the basics. What is a mill? How is it calculated? What's the importance of the resort tax to our city? And a brief look at the breakdown of the general funds allocated to each of the departments. I thought that that was an excellent start, and it offered, but it was offered in the middle of a typical weekday. So this information is crucial to that foundation of an informed public opinion, and I would like to see it offered widely during more times when folks can actually attend. At that meeting, attendees were offered their first glimpse of the 2019-2020 budget. I picked up a copy myself.
You wanna go ahead and wrap it up? You got 3 minutes.
Okay, and it didn't cover, that meeting didn't cover the proposed budget really well at all. And if you didn't have the chance to attend that meeting, then your first chance to look at it was probably 4 or 5 days ago. So we're all here with, very little time to prepare and only 30 minutes to voice our concerns. And you can understand how some people would feel ignored, and perhaps that the city doesn't really care to include them in this process based on that outcome. So I choose to believe that the city did not intend for that to happen, and I would be hoping that you'd be willing to put in a good faith effort to fix the situation and offer additional information sessions. I asked department heads to provide short justifications for their budget. We got to hear from the chief last month. We didn't get to hear from any of the other departments.
Let's wrap it up.
Okay, and then wrapping up, moving forward, I realize that the city has a legal requirement to vote on this budget before this kind of public participation can take place. But I would ask that for that vote, when that vote happens, to acknowledge that the process until now has been insufficient, and that the council commits to engaging into a more in-depth public process for this year and future years. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
I'm Lucy Nielsen. I live at 401 Platte Avenue South. And actually, I'm a newcomer here, so this is my first meeting. I'm from Virginia, so things are done a little bit differently, but I try to express how I'm feeling about the library. Libraries are vital to communities. Not only do they maintain these precious collections of books, videos, audiobooks for public use, but they also provide access to other services, computers, programs for children and adults, and then also just a quiet place to go and study or read. Perhaps Mr. Carnegie said it best. A library outranks any other one thing a community can do to benefit its people. It is a never-failing spring in the desert, so I urge you to restore the funds needed to maintain existing library hours. Thank you.
Any other public comment? One last time. Close public comment. At this time, we'll open up the work session, which the first item is the annual budget.
The hearing on the preliminary budget includes questions from the governing body also, that they are supposed to be able to ask department heads or the mayor.
And that's what we're gonna do right now.
Oh, so this, but I thought you closed it and now
Close
it's,
the public. Public.
so this isn't the closing of the preliminary budget hearing?
No.
Can we extend it to another day when Jody Moore can be here? Or do you guys
I move that we extend the preliminary budget hearing until all the department heads can be here to answer questions.
Second.
How's that expected? Yep, we need a date.
Tomorrow?
When's Jody over?
Not tonight.
I don't believe we could do it tomorrow, because wouldn't that have to be publicly noticed and have all of the appropriate?
I think if it's the
times?
same hearing, it's just continued.
Yeah, we're keeping the hearing open.
The hearing continues to be open.
So it's not a new hearing. It's a continuation of the same hearing.
As we discussed the motion that's on the table, I would like to reach out. Lonnie, can you refresh our memories collectively, both for the council as well as the public that's here, the timelines that are relevant? And
So it needs to be approved by
Next Thursday, September 4th.
Oh, next Thursday.
Oh, yes,
Is anything
Thursday,
next
September
Thursday?
5th, correct.
okay, so if it's not approved tonight, then it does need to be approved, continued and wrapped up no later than September 5th, which is next Thursday. Any other timelines that are involved?
well, I have a report that is due at the August 30th, and this resolution is required with it. So
So the resolution is required August 30th.
for that report.
Even if it's not approved, we would
They
submit
have
it as
to have a
temporary?
They have to have a signed resolution with it.
Okay, so September 5th is not really the deadline then?
It is for actually getting the budget approved, but to have that report, I don't know, it's a rural development for lumps, but it's a report that I have done.
I understand the need and the desire to have all of the department heads here, and I think that would be beneficial. Where I have a hesitancy to delay this is we've got a lot of folks who've set out time from their calendar to come and voice their concerns and to hear us discuss and ask questions. And I guess my gut is I'd like to give it a go and ask the questions while these folks are gathered and delay making a decision as to whether it makes sense to continue this until the end of that opportunity. My understanding is the way this is set up and the way I've heard it discussed is we're open to extending this beyond 6:30 tonight if necessary. 6:30 tonight is not a hard time. So my first bet is we've got everybody here. Let's put forth the effort to ask the questions now and have some of the conversations. It may be that if we distill it down to the key factors to make a decision, we find out we do have enough information to make those decisions. I'm just throwing that out as a possibility, and so I'd like to, as I said, there's a motion on the table, so we need to determine what to do with it. But I would like to at least have a conversation and then possibly entertain that motion at the time we feel we're wrapping up this meeting, if we feel it's necessary at that time.
If we have our discussion, when do we make motions if we want to make amendments to the budget presented to us? Are those made during the action on the budget, after this hearing is closed, after the preliminary hearing is closed? Is that when they're made? It hasn't really been explained.
I would expect, like most things, and I'll look to Lonnie for clarification. I would say the clerk, I should refer to titles, forgive me. Generally, I anticipate that what will happen before the night is done is that there will be a motion to approve the budget, and at that point, that's when there would be a motion to amend via X, Y, Z. And I look to you, because you're up on this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I am. And my concern is that we close the public portion of the meeting when they may have more questions as we ask ours. And I'm not sure, a preliminary budget hearing doesn't work the same as a public hearing on an ordinance. It's different because the public and the elected body is supposed to be able to ask the department heads questions about their budgets and get the answers before the preliminary hearing is closed. And it can be, I mean, I can read it right from here. The hearing may be continued from day to day and must be concluded and the budget finally approved and adopted by resolution by the later of the first Thursday after the first Tuesday in September, or blah, blah, blah. So it just means that it continues the same hearing from day to day until everybody's questions are answered and everybody's satisfied, okay, I got my answers.
And I agree that the statute does read that questions are heard and answered, and that's an important part by both the public and by the council. As I listened, and please don't quote me on this, I think what I heard mostly as I look back at my notes was mostly statements of support and comments. I don't know that I heard or request for action, but I don't know that I heard any questions, and I would, if there are any questions that we don't answer, anybody who asks questions, if we don't answer them, please make sure to highlight that when we get there.
Can they, if the mayor has closed the public hearing?
If there's a question that isn't answered, that we didn't get because of our note taking, it has to be answered, so just remind
So
us.
the public can continue to ask questions? Yes. Okay, okay, that's what I wanna make sure, and then if the people here, the people asking the questions, or the elected body are not satisfied that their questions have been answered, or that the person that was here was not available, and if somebody else could not answer it, then we can continue the public hearing to a later date before the 30th.
The only, and I hate to say pushback, but I apologize, I'm not going to come up with a better term for that, is the statutes say that the questions need to be answered. It does not specify that the asker has to be satisfied with the answer or happy with it, so.
I didn't say that,
I
I said the question answered.
And I thought I heard satisfactory,
please
no, that's, we're good. But I just wanna make sure that it's not mistaken that it'll be satisfactorily answered, because that's subjective and we can't guarantee that.
That's not what she said.
Okay.
She never used that word. And the
I
other,
did leave my hearing home, ate home tonight, so I apologize.
the other thing we need to make sure is that we've got a boatload, I guess, of email today. And we need to go through those and see if anybody's asked any questions that need to be answered.
And I think that would be a role for us too, to raise those on behalf of those people who aren't here, that do know they have questions.
So how are we gonna go through the budget page by page and ask questions?
No, we have a motion on the table right now.
So if we wanna hold off on this motion until we see how it goes, do we table it and then bring it back? Is that what we do?
You can withdraw the motion, I can withdraw my second, we can table it and bring it back. We obviously have some questions that we need to have answered, so that we can present it appropriately to the public. And the library is the big question.
I think if we withdraw it, it's off the table, and I would be in full support of remaking it later.
I will make a motion to withdraw my motion.
I withdraw my second.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question on page 1 of the final budget. And it's under the section for council. And I'd like to know how it's determined what these appropriations are going to be for the council and how it's determined how they're going to be spent. Because we didn't ever have a group discussion about, this is our budget and this is how we're going to spend it. I just wanna know how that's determined.
So we just go by the numbers that were there last year
Okay,
and adjust them accordingly to what was spent and,
how is it determined how the awards were spent? Because I don't ever recall any discussion coming in front of us, excuse me, about how this line item is gonna be spent, because it was, almost double what the $500 was.
You wanna explain that one?
Yeah, and I should have renamed it, not awards. That, is the $900 and some dollars for Sam Park District.
Okay.
So
And-
it should be, I should have included it.
And how was it determined that that wouldn't be training? Because the training budget was $1,000 and only had 214 spent.
Because we put that in there for new council members, if they want to go to trainings that are offered, you need to have money in there for the new council members that come on every year.
I'm just asking.
So, and as far as the training goes, it could come out of there for Dan Clark, but he's more of a consultant type that came down to explain companies.
And we had him come down for the grant.
Yes. for the CDBG.
And then I just have one more thing on that.
Sure.
It states that in the salaries portion, that's for 4 members at 100%. But it's actually for 6 members at 67%. Because there's not one of us assigned totally to water and one assigned totally to sewer. And it's apparent, and it doesn't matter who, but it's apparent to me by looking at this, that 2 members of the council are not drawing their salary. And so that should be reflected in the water and sewer also, because those show that it's 100% taken out.
Or 1 member, it works out the same. You all get paid the same.
Yeah, I know, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about how it's reflected in the budget. Because we don't have 1 member totally working in just sewer, and we all work a little bit in water, a little bit in sewer, and
It evens
it's about
out.
67%.
It evens out.
I understand the question, I think. It does even out, but what I hear,
I can change the percentage.
yeah, is saying 6 at 67 and then 6 at 13 and 6 at 14, and you would feel,
Or
do you think that more accurately reflects to the layman who's not here for the meetings?
Yes.
I would support that change if we want to amend that.
I think it's
Save
much
that
more
for
accurate.
amendments later.
We can change that.
There we go, we don't even have to make a motion to this be taken care of.
I have a question.
Yes.
Help me to understand the difference in the judge salary and benefits.
So, we broke those 2 out, just to show what his salary is and then what the city pays on top of that. So it was more clear because, there was questions about increasing the salary and stuff, but we wanted to make it clear how it was broke out.
Any more comments on page 1? Public comment? Page 2? Okay.
I have a question, and I'll address this to the city clerk. And this is kind of in line with Beth's comments earlier. Thank you, Beth, for your comments at the public portion. And I think it's gonna tie into an inevitable discussion we're gonna have on the library as well. So as you look at, let me back up. Do any of your staff, including yourself, get sick time as part of?
Sick time and vacation is figured, like, if you were to take, you get figured out at 2,088, or 2,080 hours a year. So when you take vacation sick, that goes towards that 2,080. So the only thing that is not figured in here
Explain payouts.
Somebody go off.
so if, explain payouts, if somebody was, we would have to pay them out a quarter of their sick, a quarter, or full vacation and any comp time accrued. But within these numbers here, they're based on a 2,080 hour year.
If somebody does not use sick time in a given year, do you carry that balance over or hold it in your budget so that you can pay it out the following year if they
No,
used it the next year?
We had tried to do that, and then the whole issue with the resort tax came up, and we can't.
The resort tax,
Last
explain
year.
that.
That was last year, so
So
The
you
way
were
that it
taking
was-
it out of resort tax?
No.
No. it was the allocation of the, tax relief.
Right.
That was done differently, legally, the right way last year. And,
So
so
we
that
were working
shorted,
towards it.
we were getting close to it, but that shorted us about $120,000.
I still don't
So
understand.
normal, what they had done in the past is take that 15% for tax relief and put it in the general fund. When it really needs to go for tax relief. So what we do is we lower the
Mills.
mills,
The mills are not being lowered.
that 15%, so that cuts us off. That
Okay.
120,000.
So why is it not figured in to the general fund now? I mean, if you had that at one point, then
We
you
didn't,
must have balances.
no, we were working to try to figure out how to put it in.
We were working on it until we were shorted
And
last
you
year.
just
Well, I think it's something we need to continue to work on.
Oh, I know,
Oh,
we agree.
totally agree with you.
We agree.
And so my question goes back to, and it's not, it's just that the city clerk has the benefit of being the top of page 2.
Mhm.
But this same comment would go toward all of the department heads, but in my mind is, if I'm looking at a budget, if I anticipated that there were gonna be 80 hours of work that were gonna be paid out this week, and that included sick time, if somebody didn't take that sick time this year, that means they have it in their balance and they could take it next year. To me, that needs to make sure that we include that as, at the end of this year, as we're calculating next year's. I remember past discussions we've had about officers, that if officers left, we'd have to address payouts and accrued vacation and stuff. And what causes me concern about the library discussion, and it doesn't discount at all any of the passionate expressions of how important a library is to a community and to our community specifically, is that I'm wondering if we have a hole in our planning process. I don't believe there's anybody at this table who thinks it's our role or has a desire to go in and micromanage any of the department heads within their individual budgets. In fact, I've heard quite the contrary, where we specifically try to avoid that. But as an overall statement, I would say if that's a hole that we're not including in our budgets, it's a problem we need to address going forward, because my gut reaction is, as we get to the library, is there's a shortage from something that was unanticipated, but maybe should have been unanticipated. And we may be looking toward one of the solutions. I'm about to get a lot of rocks thrown at me, so anybody wants to step back a foot. One of the solutions may be in line with what I've heard floated, that there is a cut in hours. Now, I'll ask questions on that later, because those numbers don't make sense to me, but if Chief Wells had an issue that came up that he hadn't anticipated, our answer to him would be, good luck, make that work within your budget. If our Public Works Director had there's a definition of emergency where we can dip into the reserves, but I think the line for emergency is different from the line for less than ideal. And I don't think we dip into reserves for less than ideal. I think there's a demarc between emergency and less than ideal. And so going
We
forward,
kind of get on.
yeah,
a little
I'm
bit.
done, but just going
Okay.
forward,
And
I think I heard her
I
say,
think we all agree.
you deal with it, and right now, if somebody got sick, you'd step up, put in overtime, maybe the hours would, maybe the office would be shut for half a day once a week or something. But-
We would have to, yeah, we would have to.
Thank you.
Is it possible that the department heads could, when it comes time to do the budgeting, they could figure out what's on their books right now as far as sick time and vacation time, and have a line item in their budget each year that grows every year, because hopefully that's gonna grow. Hopefully we don't have somebody that's using every single minute of sick time. And so that we have that when we have these emergencies. I mean, people are out for months sometimes with illness or injury, and we need to pay them what we owe them. Is it possible that the department heads could figure that up before
I
the
think it's
next?
something that we all need to discuss. I really do.
With the department head.
Yeah. But I would really like to get through the budget here.
How do other cities do it? They must take it out of the general fund.
They're accumulated
Yeah.
sick leave and stuff, a lot of towns don't, they're in the same boat as us. The bigger cities, I'm assuming they probably do, but the smaller ones.
And I think in line with Jen's input earlier, and I agree, Mayor, that we should work to get through this. But I think Jen's comments earlier about what are we gonna do differently, not only about bringing people in, but I think I've marked that down. That one of the things we need to commit to is that we are going to incorporate that within the future. So I'm good I'm glad we had the discussion, but I think we've got an actionable item out of that to address in the future, and that was kind of my goal, so.
Right. Now we're on page 2.
I have a question for James.
Okay.
James, is it possible that if we were to be able to find the money that, Neil, the city planner, would be open to going full-time instead of 3/4 time?
Yeah, he would obviously like to prefer to be full-time.
That's the only question.
Anything else on page 2? Page 2, cleaning. Diane,
Help me understand, and the people that question me about this, the increase in the attorney's salaries.
that is our contract increase.
And that includes benefits, insurance, retirement, that is included, or not retirement, but insurance is included in that, and all the other fees that the city has to pay. And it looks more because it's 90%, whereas last year I believe it was 75%. So that does reflect that, so it look a lot higher, but
So just to restate, this appears exaggerated because more of her salary in previous years was allocated to the enterprise funds. And after the concerns expressed about making sure things were appropriately allocated, this isn't a $20,000 raise or an $18,000 raise. This is, we're paying for it from general as opposed to water and sewer.
Right.
On the, Energy Corp Vista, do we still have it budgeted 4,000 general fund, 4,000 water enterprise and 4,000? Okay.
Yes.
Sewer enterprise, okay.
Any more questions on page 3? Page 4. Please. Diane,
Mr. Mayor, could you explain how the special event officer's budget is used?
point?
That is for the reserves that come in, I shouldn't call them reserves, I guess they're actual officers from other towns that come in, and are used for the 4th of July and for the rally.
What expenses are we actually paying with that? My understanding is that in most of those cases,
It's just their wages.
we're not allowed, most of those, my understanding was, are actually unpaid. We're allowed to,
Because they're not reserves, they are actual
Chief?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to comment on that. We do not pay our reserves as we have in the past. We do not pay the reserve officers, as I don't feel it is prudent for us or lawful to do. But we do have other officers who have many years of experience, some of them 15, 20 years of experience, that we borrow from other agencies who have the experience and know how to deal with large crowds and have the right temperament that we're looking for. And so a lot of these have a lot of experience with the city of Red Lodge, and those are paid at a rate for their time that they're here.
so that's additional post-certified
These are
officers, not the
post-certified
non-post-certified reserves.
That is correct. Well, there is no such thing as a post-certified reserve, but yeah, as a post-certified officer, yes.
So like, how many do you hire on the 4th of July?
4th of July, I don't know that we hire any additional.
So they're all for the rally?
Yes, this year, all of them were for the rally.
Beth Hutchinson, I noticed that there's a breakout for all of the department heads until you get to the police department. Is there a reason for that? Pardon?
Oh, I was just for the department heads, as far as like the officers and then the chief.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, it seems if you have every other department broken out, that there should be consistency.
We can do that. Dave?
I have a follow-up question or clarification, that I'd like to ask the chief. He mentioned that all of the additional officers this year were from the rally. And I notice we've got a budget in our budget this year that's there. My concern is, we've had in the past discussions or comments, they haven't come before the council, but we've been made aware of them, where we have gone to event organizers, and asked for additional dollars to help cover. I have two concerns. One, it sounds like we did not do that for the Home of Champions Rodeo, and we did do that for the rally.
I don't believe that we
scares
did.
me a little bit.
I don't know that we actually went and asked. It was brought up in discussion that we may be looking that way, but if no person was actually asked. We did have a donor, out of the goodness of their heart, come forward and donate.
And I
To
did
that
go
cause.
make the ask.
Yeah,
I
and I
did
just,
go make the ask, and where I was at on that was probably, we're gonna have to work that into the application of city-owned lands or something like that to get.
and I have a
something out.
huge.
And that's for a discussion.
I have a huge concern, again, to your point, it'll be for a future date, so I don't wanna drag this into it. But in my mind, those big events, be it the rodeo, whether it be the rally, those are responsible for a lot of additional dollars coming into our town. As we've listened to the bankers and the reports of coming in about how big deposits are, which is the closest metric we have following the rally, following the 4th of July. It really scares me to do anything that might make one of those organizations stop coming here, because I think we would be stepping over piles of dollars to save pennies. So I appreciate you building that into the budget. I think that's important, and I think we should do that in the future as well.
So just to clarify, Home of Champions Rodeo has been brought up. There is additional law enforcement that does attend the Home of Champions Rodeo. However, that is in the county, and we are not responsible for that. That is provided by the county, because it is on county property.
Thank you.
During the rodeo. So is the Iron Horse Rodeo. It's at the rodeo grounds.
Um,
So that is in the county also.
Just
But
the camping.
actually, the other events take place in the city. Just like with the 3 parades and the people that come here for the 4th of July, They may go to the rodeo, at the rodeo grounds in the county, so do the Iron Horse Rodeo people, and that's in the county. And the people that have the campers up there during the Iron Horse Rodeo hire their own security.
I guess I'd like to summarize and then be able to move on to, that I appreciate the fact that you have anticipated, the additional officers for when you deem they will be necessary and built that into the budget. I think that's a good move. I think that's the appropriate move, and thank you.
I'd like to see the justification. I'd like to see, you know, what are the stats for the 4th of July? What are the stats for the rally? What are the stats for Winter Carnival and Christmas Stroll? I know that you and I have had that conversation. And from our conversation that I remember, 4th of July was the wildest one as opposed to the rally.
Actually, it's, the 4th of July is not the wildest. I would, if I said that, I would have been misquoting it. 4th of July is not the wildest. In fact, we have, on the 4th of July parade, it is very, very easy to control, and we're able to do that with the reserves.
I'm not worried about the parade. I think it's the nighttime events that get wild.
Well, the nighttime events are like any other event. Anytime you have a group of people, there's alcohol that is consumed. Our officers do a very good job of doing that, as well as the sheriff does a very good job of assisting us in providing people also. And with the highway patrol, it's a conjunction of all of us coming together, which is providing the proper law enforcement protection that we need. Where I see a need for additional law enforcement is when we have a lot of the Beartooth Rally, and there's a lot of people there. Our officers stop a tremendous amount of DUI drivers by making contact with them as they're getting on their bikes and stopping them at that point. And so we've done a very good job as far as making sure that we're really actively working at it. And like you said, I as far as policing goes, with information that I can divulge at this time, we put the manpower where we thought we needed the manpower.
Any more discussion on page 4?
What is the additional $5,000 at the bottom for policy and training? Is that the specific?
Yep, it actually is. And so
addition to
what
the other
we talked about is, we talked earlier in our budget process, that was the Lexipol program, which provides a program for a policy and procedure manual, which is computer generated. It has gone over by numerous attorneys, both federal level and state level, to make sure that we are within policy of what we are supposed to be doing. And that we're training our officers according to how they should be trained, meeting the standards. And it doesn't only provide the policy, it actually provides an online training course to policy. To where if I have an officer or if there's an issue with maybe juveniles or partner family member assaults, and we need to train our officers a little bit more on that, I can select the videos that they're going to go, which trains according to policy. And so it's a $5,000 policy, which has been backed up by numerous agencies throughout the United States. And it is, in my opinion, the best way to go to make sure that I keep us and our officers out of a lawsuit.
And I recall when that came up before, and Chief Wells had actually volunteered to bring the, sales or presenter from them in. And my recollection at that time is we were all kind of universally, if that's your budget, if you think that's the best way to do it, we backed and supported at that time. So it's just clarifying that that is the program we're talking about.
That is correct, sir.
Page 5.
I have one,
Yes.
just one quick question if we're gonna nickel and dime this. Computer support, can you explain what that is?
Each department gets charged for computer support.
So we have backups and IT people on.
Yeah, we divide that up.
To back up our system.
And the police is a little bit different. We have to maintain videos, like if we have body cameras on us, we have to maintain those. We have to make sure that they're backed up and that they're properly backed up to the point that if we need them for evidence, we can produce those videos. And we're required by law to keep them a certain amount of time per event, depending on what they would be. And so it is a very unfortunate expense that I wish we didn't have to pay, but unfortunately do.
And the way that that's done in a lot of businesses, and including municipalities, is it's generally a contract basis. So what happens is you pay for support and they're guaranteeing that they'll respond with X number of hours. So rather than waiting till a hard drive dies and saying we're gonna buy a new hard drive, you actually have a support contract with somebody. And I believe, Lonnie, that's what all ours are, is a support contract. Is that excellent?
I have a question, just
Water, $600. Why are we buying water for $600? I'm part of the recycling people, and I hope that's not plastic bottle water.
It is what our share would be for paying the water.
City
bill for
water.
city water.
Oh, okay.
The city doesn't get free water.
She sees all those plastic
Good.
bottles.
Go ahead, Jane.
On your part-time and transports, zero budget for this year?
Yes, zero
For
budget
transport?
for transport, yes. In the past, we've had to transport our own prisoners, and we were able to work it out with the county. The county is responsible to transport our prisoners, and so we don't have a line budget for that because we don't transport prisoners anymore. The county is by law required to transport our prisoners, and so we were able to cut that out of our budget.
Wow, good.
So you pay with that with your county tax?
Yes, you still pay for it.
And you're
Did you have
And
seven
the budget's
officers
still-
last year?
So we were slotted for 7 officers last year, yes. And as I've said in previous talks, it's hard, it's different than any other business that you may have. An officer requires 6 months of training before we can actually put him on the streets and put him out there by himself. So we do a little bit less than 6 months. We do 10 weeks of training where they're with another officer, FTO is what we call that. And that process starts from them not knowing anything, even if they do, from where to turn the lights on to, at the end of that process, how to fully complete arrest and make a case to take it to district court for a felony. And to make sure that they are fully trained in the procedures that we have, as well as our policy. Our policy manual is about this thick, and they're required to know and act accordingly to that, as well as the state law, which is several books thick. So when we're done with that, we then send them to the state academy, which is required by law, and that there is 3 months. And so they are required to do that for 3 months. So I have to employ and pay an officer for 6 months before I ever get to use him. So currently we have 2 new officers, okay? I'm gonna complain a little bit here. We have 2 new officers, that's not a complaint, I'm glad that we have those. We are in the process of hiring another officer, and I have 1 officer on sick leave. So even though it shows I have 7 officers, we're really stretching it really thin, creating overtime and stuff to cover the streets that we need to do to provide the protection that I feel is very important for the citizens of Red Lodge. So yes, we do have, and we did have 7 officers last year.
Well, the reason I was asking you is because I see that the budget went up like $62,000, right? So I was calculating and I was like, oh, well, maybe you didn't have 7 last year compared to this year. So I was just thinking 62,000 was a lot of increase.
Yes, so the union, which is police officers, they're in a union. They have a contract, and we have to maintain that contract with them. That contract is negotiated, it was negotiated before I'm here, but we're required to pay the contracted amount of those officers. And so the wage is reflected within that
So it's a
budget.
union issue.
When-
It's actually a union.
Well, it's an, believe me, they're not getting rich.
No,
but
I'm
I
not
mean,
saying they are, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you don't do a great job. I was just curious.
Yeah, it's contracted through the union, and there's a pay matrix. What we have, more hours more years that they have on, it goes into that pay scale, and that pay scale is easily available for anyone to see where we're at. I've got absolutely no problem. In fact, just to give you an idea, our officers start out at $20.50 an hour. Okay, not much at all. The county, and thankful that they're able to pay what they do, but they're starting their officers at $28 an hour. So it's $8 an hour difference for patrolling in the same county. So we are trying to, there's a balancing act, trying to pay enough to keep good quality officers, as well as trying to be fiscally responsible with the budget that is set before us, like what we're doing here in this room. And like I said, was very, like a lot of the department head, all the department heads, we only spent what we need, was able to give back over 41,000 last year. So it was budgeted, we didn't spend it, we put it back into the budget.
Chief Wells, if I can dig in just a little bit further, follow up. So that increase, what percentage of that would you say was a difference in man hours versus a difference in hourly wage?
That is a hard question to answer without just guessing.
If you swag it, is it 60-40?
Well, so it's more expensive to hire an officer at overtime than it is to hire him at straight time. And because of sick time and because of training, there's a lot of overtime that was involved within that pay matrix. So it's a really complex thing. Every officer makes a different wage depending on their experience and their time that they've served here. And so like you said, it does make a difference, and it's really hard to answer that question.
But her question had to do with the increase for the upcoming year.
Right.
So, and what I heard the response was, it's a union thing. And I actually heard within the question, do we anticipate more man hours this year than we had last year?
It will probably be about the same man hours that we had. So we have vacancy savings as well. With vacancy savings is meaning that there's times that we're not paying an officer that we should be paying an officer. And so that comes into some of the savings as well. And so, like I said, it's hard. I don't really know exactly with the crystal ball. I have an officer out right now that's gonna be out for a minimum of a month. And so while we're doing that, we're covering whatever we can.
And if we have an opening because somebody leaves and it takes us 4 weeks to find them, that's where that vacancy
It
savings.
takes almost 2 months to hire a new officer.
So I apologize, the person who asked the question, did we get it answered to?
Yeah.
Diane?
So, the chief said that he saved $40,000 out of his budget last year. What happens to that money?
It just goes back into the general fund. It's starting, you start with cash available. So what isn't spent,
Goes back into
it goes into the, and
Yeah.
that's where.
And if you wanna give me a savings account, I'll take it.
But we're not offering rebates?
I do think it's worth noting again, while we've got a great, public turnout and hopefully a lot of people interested in watching this on the live stream or reading about it, I do think it is worth noting that in my opinion, this is one of those conversations that as we talk about that future budget meeting, that was brought up earlier by Jan, we have seen our police budget grow as a percentage of the general fund very significantly over the last half dozen years. In fairness, that has come before a council as we looked and as I thought about ideas and have talked to different people, you know, we have it come to the council if it's gonna be more than a 5% increase. The reality is everything does come to the council and past councils have approved it and we have a budget before us that we'll be approving. But one of the things that I've noticed in the past is that as we've done that, we've decreased from other departments, be it parks, be it, and I think that this town needs to have a really good conversation about what level of support we want, comma, and that we are willing to pay for. That needs to be part of that conversation. I love our police department, I love the job they do, I see the results that they bring, but we may need to address the conversation about how do we get some additional dollars to pay for that continued support, because we can only not water our trees so many years before that becomes a problem and it's expensive, or library, or you name it. So we need to have a conversation. I'll just use that opportunity to get on that soapbox for a minute. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, anything else on page 4?
I just have one
Yes, Gina.
question, doing businesses, I understand that it sounds like you have to have overtime in the budget, to cover sicknesses and whatnot, but, to have, the budget at 25, but then it actually double for this coming year, it looks like, if I'm reading this right, seems extremely dramatic, and is the red just hypotheticals, or is that actually?
That's the proposed.
That's
what they want.
That's the proposed.
So
I
it
mean,
went from
writing
20
that much overtime into a business just seems.
So to clarify, last year was 25,000, so it only went from 25 to 28. The 14 is the spent through, so it's kind of like a running total so far.
But when I look as a business owner at overtime being that high for a business, it makes me feel like we're not staffing correctly to begin with. So there might be, if we're looking for a few $1,000s here and there, that might be a number to look at.
And I guess I have a question, because I don't see overtime in any other department. Why is the police force the only one?
It's figured into the other departments, it's just not broke out.
Why
It
do we
was
not?
requested to have the police department broke out the way it is.
Would it not make sense to have all of them broken out so we can see and compare and understand?
I'm gonna make a note of that. Again, just like future line item for unused balance, have a future line item or future breakout overtime from planned hours. And we won't be able to do anything with that tonight, but noting it for that future session, which I hope you will also come to.
Anything else on page 4? Yes, Deb?
I just have a quick question on, if I'm reading this correctly, the green column shows what was spent out of the 19 budget up to June.
Yes.
Which would mean there's only 30 more days.
That's the end of the
That's
fiscal
the
year.
end of the
That's the end of
fiscal
the year.
So the numbers that you get here is what was the fiscal year,
Okay,
and then the red numbers are the new year.
so.
We are officially spending money that has not been approved and allocated yet.
That I understand. So the 14,000, he actually left 14,000 on the table
Yes.
for overtime.
11.
That was part of that 41,000 that I think he
Librarian,
indicated he did not use.
Yes, that is correct.
So Chief, why do you feel like your overtime will be doubling in this year, I guess is the question?
It's not doubling.
Well, it is from this past year. I know that it's not doubling from the
It's not
budget,
doubling
but
from what
something
he
from the
spent.
actual.
Yeah,
from the
What
actual.
he spent? Okay.
So one of the things that we can't, we can never find out, like you said, I have an officer that's 6 months and we have the same issue that the library has. He has plenty of sick time and we have to be paying that sick time. So that wage is still being paid, but someone has to cover that shift. And in covering those shifts, whether it be somebody at the academy that's trained for 6 months that I have to fill those shifts, that overtime has to be paid. And so we budget that, hopefully that we don't go over, like you saw that I gave quite a bit of that back last year. But I don't want to, because I can be held liable for anything I spend over my budget that's not there. And I take it very serious to make sure that my budget is there. It's there because we possibly may need it with the training of the new officers. We may have another officer we have one new officer this year that's 6 months. I probably am not gonna get to use that officer, and so that is gonna create some overtime. I have an officer right now who's sick and may be going in for further treatments, and that may cause more overtime. And so it's kind of like hoping to have a crystal ball knowing what it is, but whatever it is, I wanna make sure that it's there to cover it. And so if I'm not, I mean, then I'm gonna go over my budget, and then I'm in trouble for going over my budget, spending over what was allotted to my department.
So then when it comes to the city and the police department, this comes to the setting priorities as far as they're allowed to allocate more overtime, whereas the library loses funding. You know what I mean? I think that this is like a priority thing, and we just have to start leveraging and or figuring out what's
Well, then maybe what Jody has to do in putting in her budget, or whoever does the budget for the library, is put a line for overtime and anticipate, because what you were saying before is true. Somewhere along the way, people get sick, they get pregnant, they get to retire, whatever, they go on vacation or whatever, and somebody has to have a fund to cover those people. As a teacher, we always had that, and then that fund is there for you, and we have substitutes or whatever, so there should be some kind of fund that's already allocated, which is what this gentleman does, which it makes complete sense. I mean, obviously, if somebody gets sick, you don't want your police force to be deficit, so, I get that, and that makes sense. I was gonna ask you what overtime would be for, and you already answered it. So if that's the case, then that's what other folks need to do as well.
Yeah.
If you're saying that it's already built into our budget, well, then it wasn't here for us to see, I suppose. But if it's not, then that's an option that needs to be.
You can't have let one department out, this is a compliment, outsmart the rest of the departments when it comes to
Yeah,
writing.
no, well, I mean, it makes sense that he does that, and
Yeah.
obviously Jody needs to do that, or whoever does the library budget, I guess.
And I think asking for the itemized breakout in the future will help the council and the public spot when a department isn't doing that as well. It'll be an extra set of eyes.
More comments on page 4?
Well, and
Deb?
Sorry, go ahead.
If I'm understanding this correctly, and this may be for the transfer, we cannot accrue for sick leave over and above the yearly, because at the end of the year, any monies go back to the general fund. They are not held in our budget, is that correct?
Right, it's an overall.
So it wouldn't matter if we had a line item that said overtime. We
Unless-
couldn't hold it
I
until
mean, we
then.
can set up, they're called restricted funds. to where you put every year, start putting money aside for instances like this.
So we
It's
we
doable.
can accrue, but we have to set up restricted funds as the mechanism.
Right, because, or it just goes back.
Well, that's exactly what I was gonna say, that if he allocates this money, but then for overtime, and then he gives it back, that doesn't mean that nobody will get sick next year. So you have to do that kind of fund, or you're always gonna run into this problem, whether it's the police department or any other type of situation. You have to have a fund where you just pop that money. If you don't use it, well, that's awesome, but that doesn't mean you won't use it next year.
Right.
You know, how lucky you are that nobody gets sick, right? But I mean, you know, next year they do get sick, and then what do? You don't have the money, or you get 2 officers that are sick, or you have some kind of terrible situation. So yeah, you take the money, you pop it into a fund, and there it is.
Can I ask can I bring it back to the special events, officer really quick? It looks like there's $4,000 budgeted to it, and there was a conversation earlier about whether or not, maybe I just didn't follow properly. When there are events like the Iron Horse Rodeo, well, not Iron Horse Rodeo, but when there's big events in town that bring more people, that require more officers, do we, does the city make money from a permit for that, and then it goes directly to pay for those officers? Do we charge for that, or, because that seems like $4,000 that can go right to the library.
I think more significantly, where we're gonna get dollars is not the permits or the fees. I think where we're gonna recognize dollars is via the resort tax, and I think that's a conversation that the committee that's just met yesterday for the first time to look forward, that makes all the sense in the world to me, that we figure out, and as we send that to the voters next time, to say that part of what that resort tax can go for is the additional expenses that are a direct result of more business coming to town.
But so somebody, if I, as a private citizen or business owner, decide to put on an event in town, why am I not required to cover the costs of that event? Such as police officers. I know that I've put on events in larger cities and had to cover the security costs for
I
that, so
defer
I'm
to the
curious.
chief of police.
Okay. Thanks. Like, is there a way to just make it so they
The thing
pay
is,
more
the
money?
Iron Horse, so there may be a group that puts on the Iron Horse.
Right.
But the town benefits from the Iron Horse. The bars are full, the shops are full, people are up and down the streets. And so having an event like that does bring in forces to it. Now, believe me, I am not opposed to having some sort of a fee, and that is not my decision. That is the decision of the city to come up if they want to add a fee for that additional protection. But it does benefit the city.
Well, I understand that it benefits the city. I think we'll just go in circles, so it's okay.
But we don't have any hard data on that. I mean, we could get hard data on that to find that out.
It'd be hard to get hard data as to how much is done. Now, I did have a lot of people tell me, business owners that I visited with, that it was a very good year for them. That they did better than they have in years past. And so, all I have is to visit with them who know what they did the year before and are comparing it to what they're doing this year, their deposits and everything. So it does benefit the city of Red Lodge. It is an event. It is one event that brings a lot of people into this town. And they use our services, they use our restaurants, they use our shops.
And I'll have to say, in years past, quite a while ago, during the land use application, that they actually requested money for the protection.
And that request has to come from the council.
That's
It's
exactly
written into
right.
the ordinance, that at the time of the land use application permitting process, when they come before the council, that request for the extra funds has to come before it is approved.
And I'm just very apprehensive. I think one of our solutions, and I doubt, well, I know it's not unanimous, but I think one of our solutions is we need more people coming and leaving their money and going home. That's a huge part of what we do. And it makes me tense up and the hairs stand up on my neck to do anything that I think is gonna make it harder for businesses to have a business, or we need to do what we can to support our local businesses, and that's, a lot of businesses rely on that. You said the bars are full, the restaurants are full.
How does that money come to the city funds? You know, it obviously benefits the businesses, some businesses, but how does that?
There is a resort tax.
Besides the resort
tax, but onto resort tax, but it comes back through, the resort tax at the 3% that's collected from the businesses in town, and it comes to the city and goes into the resort tax.
But that's it, it's just the 3% resort tax that comes to the city, not anything else directly from those businesses or from that
Businesses that
money.
can stay open longer because they had good events in the summer. That benefits the city.
And wages.
Sure.
Should we get back to the police budget? Any more questions on the police budget? Let's go to page 5.
I have a question on streets budget.
Okay.
It's down 25% over last year's budgeted amount.
Jim, you
For
wanna-
wages.
The wages? No.
So
Wages?
just a note on that was, we did move from some of the wages for the
Yes.
equipment operators into the parks. So there's why there was, because there wasn't any wages last year in the parks.
Why, that, just to clarify, that was basically to more accurately reflect what's actually happening.
Yes.
Because that is, those same individuals are who go and work on the parks when it's needed.
Yeah, so that reflects some of the reasoning.
And we get a new amount of people in the sewer and water on the operator.
Well, then that's gonna lead to another question on the next page, so.
Okay. Any more questions on page 5? All right, Mary.
All right. Going on Public Works Parks. We've added $29,255 for weeds, no, for salaries. Oh, no, we've added $32,000 for salaries, correct? Is that 3,000?
No.
Oh, no.
No, it's.
Okay. Okay, so 29,000. We've added that to parks in wages. But the total parks budget is down $8,000. How did we do that? What did we make not a priority?
So last year, there was some cash funds that were sitting there from previous administration and stuff that were allocated for parks. And I had, when the auditors were here, I asked what we could do with that, and they said we could use that towards the general fund parks. So that is why the parks was higher last year. than
Where
it
did
is.
we allocate that?
So it would have been under maintenance supplies, that's where the majority of that went into.
So down here
And
at
also
parks
parks
maintenance,
maintenance.
it's down $5,000.
I apologize, that's where it went. It was, 4,100 or something like that, that was in those restricted cash funds that were set aside for parks. And the auditors put that into the parks last year, but it's been spent, so that money is still spent.
That is, I think that is a really low number, $1,000 for park maintenance. We have a lot of parks, and we need to maintain them. We won't be getting any new ones. How much money did we put into reserves for the general fund?
238.
238. $238,761.
So
This
that's
year?
what the balance
No,
is,
not
what did
this
we
year.
put into it?
What did
From
we
last year?
put into it this year? What are we budgeting to put into it?
I have to grab last
I
year.
thought it was 7.
Close to 7. Maybe. I'd have to look at last year's, what it was.
So you don't know.
So just to restate what I heard, the current balance in the reserve, Mike, you said is 238K roughly,
It's on
and
this
we
page.
think, yeah, we think 7 is new.
And I might be getting ahead here, but is it possible to use some of those reserves to beef up some of these departments that have really taken hits?
I would personally be reluctant to dive into that reserve fund.
And I would share that, again, I would go to that, what's an emergency versus what's a less than ideal. Looking for analogy, if I have a job in the buildings I need to go to every day, and I have an old beater of a car, and it goes 5 miles an hour less than the speed limit, that's the top speed it'll do. I can fix that problem by leaving 5 minutes earlier for work. I don't have to go out and buy a new car. Say, oh, I've got an emergency. I can't get to work in 45 minutes anymore. I gotta go out and buy a new car. Well, it may be less than ideal, but to me, it doesn't meet that threshold of what an emergency. And what scares me is the second that you spend it, then a real emergency shows up. And that objective is to always be prepared for something that does meet that criteria.
Let me ask you a question. Would you put money into maintaining that vehicle so that you didn't have to buy a new one? We don't have a lot of money in maintaining our streets, in maintaining our parks, and we have none in maintaining our pool.
And I agree with that, because to your point, I can skip my first oil change and save a little bit, but if I skip 4 or 5 or 6 of them,
Absolutely.
then I'm gonna have a big problem with my car. And so that's one of my concerns that I expressed with the limits in the parks. We may be able to get away with this for a year or two, but this is, we can't skip too many oil changes on this one where it's gonna go.
I really think if we skip a year or two on streets or parks or pools, like we skipped a year on the pool, we're gonna have a real hard time getting any of that back in there. And what I hear a lot of talk about is special tax districts. And my belief is that the strategy is, we'll let them get really bad, and then everybody will vote to have more tax for it. And that is what I think those things have to be put back into the general fund. And we can't have any districts on the ballot until that resort tax passes. That's my belief on this. I really think streets and parks and pools are very important to the general fund.
Also, I have a question about your analogy with something being an emergency and something being less than ideal. And I think that you're using the library as an example of that you have the library in mind with that the library's declaring an emergency when we could get along with less than ideal. Having to cut library hours significantly is not just less than ideal. It's closing down a city program that is used by a lot of people and depended on by a lot of people. So to use terms like that seem to sort of minimize what's happening with the library right now. And from what I can tell, it's a matter of needed funds right now to get the library through this particular period. And so that then in the future, other things can be done with the library budget. But right now, it is kind of an emergency to the library and not a flaky emergency.
Okay. And I think my analogy to your point, I think applies to the library as I think it does every department. Clearly the library is there. I did have some questions, and maybe Deb is the best person to ask. And it actually kind of ties a little bit into Mary's comment as well. Help me understand the current number of hours that the library is open for right now a week is
38 when the doors are open. But the library has to be manned 41 hours.
Okay,
With people there because of cleaning crew that has to be let in, and that shifts don't always start on the hour and end on the hour. They, are usually 15 minutes early and 15 minutes later.
and the proposal that was discussed or put forth in the absence of $4,000 is how many hours?
That would be 2 hours on,
I think it was 24, wasn't it?
38.
14.
Yeah, 14
14.
hours cut.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I'm looking at a difference of 14 hours a week times multiple weeks, and I'm trying to think, boy, we're getting if I divide that out by, cause this is, my recollection through some of the threads that I've seen is like, this is potentially through January.
no, this
Or-
is potentially through the fiscal year. It's not through January.
So we're doing,
Because you have to accrue for overtime and sick leave and vacations, we can't just cut 20 hours or 10 hours. The 20 hours that Shirley gets paid for sick leave is figured into the budget. So that 20 hours is gone. So we've got Jody and a part-time employee. And you can't just have one person in the library all the time because of programming and things like that. So the cut has to come from somewhere. And we don't know how long Shirley's gonna be out. In the overtime that's taken place since her illness in July, all of the wiggle room in the library budget's gone for salaries. All the vacation time, all the sick leave that we accrue there has been used.
I think that referencing that as overtime is probably incorrect.
Well, it's overtime in that you've got somebody coming in to cover somebody
Right, so
else's.
it's coverage time, not overtime, and it's important on those because the person who's coming in is getting paid at a certain rate that's normal, and the person who may be staying a little longer.
Okay, additional
is
hours,
still-
we'll call that.
Additional hours is better reference.
So it shouldn't be additional hours if you're just covering, because if you have one full-time employee that's, say, working 40 hours a week, then you have two part-time employees, that should leave a lot of lenience to just have the same amount of hours. You're not actually adding hours, you just have someone coming in to cover.
But you're still paying
So
your
you're
sick
still
time, which is an additional 20 hours a
You're
week.
still paying that person.
Still paying the vacation.
Right.
Yes.
You're
Well,
paying another
I think
20.
is the total $4,000 of the maximum that you wanted, that you were requesting?
The $4,000 would get the library on its current hours, not the cut hours, but the current hours.
Yeah, I mean, that was the maximum of what you're asking.
Only
for this.
through November,
Oh.
which is why the cut is for the fiscal year.
What is the total amount that you're asking? That's what we need to know.
That's what you need to ask Jody, I'm not.
All right.
Well, then we need to
I'm not
ask
going to
Jody.
give specific fingers, but Jody did discuss it at length with me. And the bottom line is, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't on this, because if Shirley is able to come back, which is the most desirable situation, there will be a cutoff on additional hours. If Shirley's not able to come back, the payout and having another person for the perceived additional hours will occur, so.
Well, I think those are the questions we need for Jody.
and I just, as I do look at this as one of those things that I would look to the city clerk, or I would look to the chief of police, or I would look to the public works director, that if they had somebody out, I would expect there to come back and say, these are the services we're gonna have to cut in order to meet our budget numbers. And maybe we'll we'll have one guy driving a plow truck rather than two driving a plow truck, so it's gonna take longer to get the streets, or this seems like a disproportionately high impact. And again, I don't want to, and as a council, we don't want to get into managing other departments, but it seems like a really disproportionately, and I wonder if it's, I don't wanna say it's for shock value, but it does, that's. Like I said, I'm aware, I keep in mind, I've gotten a whole lot of emails, so I'm trying to summarize comments that I've gotten from both sides, and so that's one of the joys of this job.
This is a tiny department, you know, when you think about it, the library has 2 to 3 employees, period. So that's why it
And
makes
have been
an
strangled
enrollment
over
of
the
that.
last 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
They're already down the minimum number of employees to run an office, a department like this. That's why it's so critical right now. It's because they have not overstaffed like maybe some other departments have.
I had a question, because the numbers that were referenced in the in the public portion of the meeting was the 48K, and yet if I look at,
48K.
somebody said, well, there was somebody that said,
No,
like,
this
it's,
Hope was talking about
How it went
what it
down
was
for the
budgeted
year.
at.
yeah, so
It
it gone down, but if I go, there was a couple of these pages I looked at, I'm looking at a total overall of 150,000.
Okay, and that's because of the 6 mil levy from every property owner in the county, and the city of Red Lodge does not participate in that. The only thing the city of Red Lodge participates in is the difference between the county mill levy and what number you see there.
Every citizen in the city pays the same county tax to the.
I have a question for Deb. Is it a fact that when Dale Carnegie set up the libraries, that he required every community that got a Carnegie library to contribute to that library's operation? That city, that community had to make a commitment to keep that library open and
That's correct.
over and above the county mills. It
Well, there
was the-
wasn't any county mills then,
Yeah.
so they had to agree to
But that,
support it.
the community that got it, and we are fortunate enough to have a Carnegie library.
Right.
And that was Andrew Carnegie.
Oh, and.
The other one.
So I'm still having, because I'm looking at our city budget, and it says total down at the bottom, $174,000.
I know, but that's not the revenue the city.
This, correct. This is one of those things that, over the years I've learned, and Jody has said for years she would love to see the library, that county mill levy come out of there, because it's very deceiving. That's how much money is actually coming out of the general fund, and it's not. So the general fund, I'm assuming, what was the total for the mills, for the county, for the library?
It was like 120-some thousand. So this year, so when we did the revenue side with Joey, and like she said, the mills could be, for what they get from the county, could be more, so.
But you guessed about
120.
So that would mean the city contribution is 54,000?
No.
Well, so, and this is another deceiving number, because of the 25,000 for the solar grant from Northwestern Energy, that's included in that 28,000. So the original budget number for last year was 162,000, and then this year we had to throw in that extra 14,000 to make that final payment on the solar project.
On a grant, that was additional to what this.
But that's not revenue,
But it's not
that was
city.
a grant.
Yeah,
So
it's not
the
grant.
14,000, but it still has to be shown in here to be paid.
So if you take that off, we're back to.
So yeah, so the
160.
library budget has been cut about $2,000.
Yes, from last year.
From last year.
When you take out the energy, the solars.
So we need to raise $2,000 to the library, is that what we're doing? I'll do a dinner, can we call it?
But it's the city's responsibility to cover its departments. It's not the community to go out and have a bake sale.
You know, as a teacher, I had to raise money all the time, so I
How much
understand.
exactly
It's
is
just
the
a reality.
city putting into the library expenses?
about 40,000.
And how does that number compare to last year?
By less than a couple thousand.
Okay, so it's a 2K decrease.
And it's been a decrease and a decrease and a decrease.
Rebecca?
So is the fear more, is it more of a fear of losing money every year versus how much more money we're losing this year? Basically, we just want this to end, the losing of the money. So this fight is more for the consistent losing of money every year versus the $2,000. Is that correct?
And covering.
Rebecca?
Looking at my budget, we could take maybe 500 out of supplies. I think my budget went over supplies this year because of tables. Right.
Last year.
Last year, yeah, last year. So, I don't foresee, unless a computer tore up or a printer quit, having some major expenditures, because all of us try to do as cheap as possible with office supplies and everything. So I can take 500 out of supplies, and, on the training, we could probably take another 500 out of that possibly.
I think I'd like to hear from Jody on just exactly on what she does want.
We just got a text, Jody was at school with her kids having school, conference, she's on her way.
Oh, okay.
She's dropping her kids off.
Dropping her
and then
kids
she'll
off
come
and
back.
so we can hang on for just a little while.
I think that's possible.
We got a lot more questions. Now we're gonna make her wait till last.
We have two students in the room questioning, how do I get on that plan?
Becky? Keep that on the table.
Well, I mean, it's a
Yeah,
thought,
thank
I'm just
you.
looking at, I like, you know, some of the
yeah.
stuff I could, and like my postage is way down, and if lawyers would get in the 21st century, I could go even lower on postage, because I try to email everything that I possibly can.
So this is what needs to be done with all, like, you shouldn't be the only person sitting here being like, oh, look, I can knock $500 off here.
Absolutely. And I could knock the whole thing
And I think
off.
that will happen as we go through the whole budget.
And actually, that's what we did do until the library thing came.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I don't mind, I can make it, and if there's somewhere else in mine that we can cut.
Thank you, Becky.
There's, I just noticed, I said cut some out training, but Lonnie never got that.
I think also when we move into the, action session, I think we'll hear some, motions for amendments to the budget, so there will be some money moving.
So far I've written down 2 things.
But even like my membership, I don't know what and I just give it to Lonnie because, but I know that would be my state bar and I think one other organization, but I think that's it's probably the I don't know that they both cost that 1,500 and something, so we can smooth that out as well.
1K down, 3K.
So,
Mayor, I would suggest that rather than diving into the library in much detail, we set that page aside and come back to it when.
Is everybody okay with public works?
No, I so sorry. So it looks like we're almost keeping the budget, but, and I think this was mentioned at the very beginning, but I'm a little bit confused. The equipment operator wasn't in 2 previous years, so if I'm looking at it correctly, we're actually dropping the budget down by 30,000 by adding the equipment operator.
Well, we also transferred some of their salary budget into the Parks Department to reflect that that's the work they're doing. Is that the dollars you're talking about?
Public Works and Parks, but then it looks like
Oh, from
we're,
streets, that was back at page 2.
so we're just not watering, is that essentially what this is?
No, it's water, they're being maintained, they're being mowed, they're being watered, the weeds are being sprayed.
How are we paying for it?
It's right there, water, $3,000.
Contract, water, plant, trees.
That's a different
That's-
topic.
That's a
That's a different topic.
What is it?
What is the topic? That's different.
So that's through,
The park service, like the new
You
park
can
board
explain
thing?
the water in the trees.
So it's being shifted to a different,
like, for park different and these are things. So they have some money in the regular park budget.
yeah, understood, just checking.
Let's go to the next page. Let's go to 7. Come back.
Pool, let's chat about the pool.
Let's bring the the pool back.
One of my concerns is there was about $18,000 left in the pool budget through the end of June, and the pool didn't open. And now the pool's come out of the general fund, and I'm afraid that once it's out, it's not coming back yet. And I'd like to know what happened to the $18,000 that was set aside for the pool, and how do we get that? I mean, this was a discussion that we never had. I found out the pool was closing on the Channel 2 News 2 nights after council meeting. And that concerns me.
So the money that was left in there at the end of June went back into the pool,
Just like everything,
into
just like all the other departments.
the pot.
We didn't have a set aside out of here in the resort taxes where that money was set aside in a restricted account.
No, I'm talking about the 18,000, we budgeted $47,200 last year for the pool, and we spent 28,972. So you're telling me that 18,000 went back into the general fund?
Yeah, into the pot, just like the police department and whatever was left in mine, in gyms. It goes into what is cash available that you start with. That's what happens in the general fund.
And is that also where the unclaimed water deposits
No.
ended up?
No.
So remember
No, that money
like
is still sitting in the water department. You guys never made a decision on where that was going.
Okay, so that's,
It's still
we did never put it into general fund, is what you're saying.
You guys have to make it. Yeah.
Okay.
And we didn't put that in anything that's general fund? So we could take all those things, the $40,000, the $15,000, and the $18,000, and we could put that into the pool?
No.
It's in the general fund. This is,
Oh.
It's all part of the general fund.
Except for the 15, because that's in a separate account.
That's in the water. And you guys have to make a resolution to move that from water into the general fund.
Oh, but we could do that.
I believe that was the discussion last, when this came up before.
Yeah, that was, my recollection is that the auditors advised that we could move it to the general fund, which makes it available.
So, and then we could, how much does it cost to patch the pool?
It can't be packed. It cannot be packed.
It can be
It's gone. The pool is unusable. The leak underneath of it at 13 to 15,000 gallons a day is we can't maintain that. The pool has already lived its life. We
How
have
much
to
do
build a
you
new
have
one.
planned to destroy or take it out of there? We can't, I mean, if it's gone,
I
we
thought
can't
that's
just
what
leave
the
it
plan
with a
of-
hole.
Planning a future pool and getting the money to build another pool in the same place. That's what the deal, when we were trying to get the money to, let's get a plan, let's get a cost, let's move forward to try and find the funding to build a pool. That pool cannot be patched and work. When you run the pump, it runs 13 to 15,000 gallons a day into the ground. We have to fill it every morning, then reheat the water, retreat the water. It's just not feasible to run that pool. The wall that fell out, you can see through it. You can see through the wall to the dirt. The pool is gone.
Is
We
that on
need
the
to build a
west
new
side?
one? What's that?
Is that along that,
Along
maybe
the
on the
rim,
west
along the
side,
top
that
of the rim.
crack along there?
Yes, I don't know what else to tell you. That the pool has lived its life. We either build a new one or we don't have a pool. And that was what the deal earlier, when I wanted to take some money and get the planning going, get something so that we could have it designed, have an idea what the cost was, and move forward finding the funding to build a new pool. We wait a year, it's another year. So instead of not having a pool for 2 years, we're not having for 3 or 4 if we don't make a move and design a pool, get it engineered, get the cost effect, and then find the money to build a pool. That one is unrepairable.
At what point can you do a set aside?
So what we, just to kind of go off of what Jim said, that last year out of resort tax, we had 47,000 set aside for pool. And we have, hired Interstate Engineering to start that first part of the engineering part of it. And what he's going to do, that first part of it is going to be all about funding, how are we gonna fund it? And it will have a small picture of this is what you're gonna get for your money. And that's where we're at right now.
But if you wanted to deal with his leftover 18, or was that 18 already incorporated into this future budget and spread around?
The 18 went into
General
the
fund.
general fund.
What's?
Yes.
We do have some hypothetical numbers on the pool. We did a presentation based on a comparable one built in Lewistown, and it was 1.4 million, I think, for a new pool. And then that worked out for their residents, if I recall, $30 a year per lot for over a 20-year period.
Yeah, I can't
Something like that.
And I think half of that money was donated.
Yeah, then they got.
Done through donations, and Interstate did do their pool for them too. So it's the same engineer.
I didn't remember that half of that was a donation.
There was quite a bit.
So the big portion of the same thing in Roundup had the same problem. And when they got to the point of a lot of donations came in, when they said, here's our pool, we need $1.5 million to build it, we have 750, and donations came in and filled it in, and they built their pool. They had started, well, we're gonna build this portion of it and plan for future this way, and the donations came in and they were able to build their pool. That's the kind of attraction we're gonna have to do, because, you know, $1.2 million to build a pool, we don't have, there's no funding for it in the city budget. It comes down to the bottom line is, we don't have enough revenue. The cost of running the city goes up, and we have not upped the mills in the city ever. Have the mills ever gone up in the city?
With
No one-
building a new pool, is that in the capital improvements plan, so that could be
It will be,
in
it will be part of it in there, but, yeah.
in resort tax, so resort tax could be used to build a new pool, and then we just have to put the maintenance of that pool and the staffing of that pool in the general fund, back into the general fund. Okay.
So it's 1.4 million to build it, how much to run it every year?
That's, it'll run back into that.
It's about 50,000 right now. It was
60,000
60,000.
a year.
But a lot of that was maintenance, because we were spending an awful lot, to bring it back, trying to stick concrete to concrete, which
That
still
was
doesn't.
coming out of different funds, that wasn't coming out of pool,
Yeah, most of that's just public works.
that was coming out of public works. Water and sewer.
Anyway, I'm just concerned that we're taking it out of the general fund and it's never coming back.
Would you feel more, I understand that overall thing, and I remember when we moved in, we're up on in the country club estates homeowners, and I remember having a conversation with my wife, because I hate reoccurring fees with a passion. I said, the difference between $35 a year and $1,000 a year is a lot smaller than the difference between $0 and $1. So, you know, so would you be more comfortable if we left the pool budget there and it had a line item of $1, just so that it's still there?
Yes.
As a placeholder?
I think you were the-
I'm completely serious. Because now it's still a line item, it's not a matter of it went away and we have to fight to bring it back, we just changed the funding to it.
What do we need to do to get it ready to sit empty for a couple years? I mean, we must have some sort of maintenance that has to be done to it.
It's all winterized, it's done, it's shut down, just like we shut it down every winter. All the draining happens, it's shut down now. We did drain it because the water gets very stagnant, so then we will have to put some water in it to hold it down in the winter, but it's, as far as we don't have to do anything to it. It's winterized, it's been winter, we never even tried to start it up.
So that doesn't come out of
That,
a pool.
that sounds like
comes out of
money.
Public works, maintenance fees.
If it's dead, why do you have to hold it down?
if we don't put some water in it, well, you're right, we don't have to, because it'll destroy itself.
Yeah,
It'll just push up out of the ground.
right. So
Quarter of the night goes to bed?
What's wrong with that, if that's
Well,
the circumstance?
We can let that happen. That'd be fun, I'd be interesting to see how, cause that's what they say will happen, I'd be interested to see how it happens. I mean, it isn't gonna make any difference.
We can live stream it, make people pay for it.
And don't we have to have
So, you
security?
wanna just put a buck in there so it stays active, or do you want to trust us enough to keep it active?
I've written down that as one of the motions to have, so I will, when we get to that, right?
Everybody good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Wanna take a look at resort tax?
What else are we on?
Is. There yet?
Questions on resort tax?
Public Works pickup, is it one payment, or is it supplemental payment?
That's just one, that's possible.
And it's paid for?
That's the final.
Same thing for the mid-loader skid, skip rate, $82,000. On parks, skateboard ramps, I have the Parks Board Chairman contact me and ask if we could not designate that for skateboard ramps, but for park maintenance of capital improvements, because they believe they have somebody coming in this grant for the skateboard ramps. She doesn't want it to get stuck.
Oh,
Can
because
you
it's,
earmark it to Moose Trails?
To rebuild it,
There's some concern, they're having somebody come in to look at it, they think they're gonna have to rebuild the whole section of it.
so we can, oh, that'd be awesome.
That's what she said.
As long as it's used.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
she's aware. She just didn't want it stuck in skateboard ramps and then have a.
So parks capital improvement.
So future pool improvements, that's our restricted account that we're putting in there. Are we going to wait until we're at least very close to the 1.2 or 1.4 million and then pay for the project?
We still have another 100 and some thousand for engineering.
Where is that in the budget?
Under resort tax.
Under resort tax?
That's what
Future pool improvements,
Yeah.
Under parks?
140,000.
Oh, the 140, okay, I'm sorry.
So that's for the engineering study?
The engineer.
What page are you on?
Yeah, where are we?
This is an
It's not
unnumbered
numbered.
page, it says resort tax,
No.
fiscal 1920, and streets is the first.
Right after page 7.
So it wasn't our
Oh, yeah.
It might not be in theirs.
But I did double check it.
Oh,
Cool. So at the top it says resort tax fiscal year 1920.
how many more years on the police car leases?
2.
So 20 and 21?
Although I anticipate that there will probably need to be new police car leases in the future as
We're just
well.
gonna take it into the next resort tax. That will have to go to the resort tax committee. That has, doesn't that take us into when it's voted on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Is there anything on here, let me rephrase the question. What obligations are on here that extend beyond when the resort tax is guaranteed, which is one more year? In which case, we would still have to pay it, but that too would come out of general budget.
The transfers are ongoing.
Right.
But the jetter lease truck is paid off, will be paid off this fiscal year, same with the, plow trucks. Those will be due.
so really the only payments coming out of here that could expand are the $100,000 and the $150,000 transfers into water and sewer.
Yes.
And if they don't continue to transfer, then water and sewer rates will increase to cover those costs. Possibly.
I have have a question about the street signs. If you do this work next year, you're gonna completely screw up the census for the town. My job that I have right now is kind of like being a bounty hunter for the census. And half of the cases I get every month, the addresses are so screwed up, it's unbelievable. And it costs a fortune to try to get them straightened out. And we have towns scattered through like the 5 surrounding counties where they have done address changes. And in my case, I just do a sampling. But when they come through next year and try to get everything to line up, if the addresses are in the process of change, it's gonna be an absolute nightmare.
Councilman Mahan, I think you had a number of actual residents that were gonna be impacted. Do you remember that?
45, I think, it was something like that, 45, 65, something like that, yeah.
So, because it doesn't impact everybody, but it was somewhere between 45 and 65. They're
It
gonna
doesn't
be
impact any of these, the north, south, it's just a few east-west addresses that are actually gonna change. All of the, you'll still be one South Platte, will still be, those numbers will stay the same. It's going to east-west that's changing, so anything on the side streets, on Deal are the ones, so there's not that many address changes gonna happen when the addressing goes into effect. There's, I think, 9 businesses, and the rest, there's residential that will change. So there's not that many addresses that will actually change when the addressing is complete.
So my question to Beth would be, we've already heard in the past about the benefits of doing it and how it's gonna help law enforcement, how it's gonna help ambulance, how it's gonna help. You've raised a concern with doing it sooner rather than later. Knowing that number is somewhere between 45 and 65, does that change is that a significant enough number to delay it?
I'm actually not sure. I think it's something that's worth looking into because it's really, really difficult. And the data that comes to the city is really critical to have. But I'm thinking, if you were in the process of renumbering streets, how will that only affect 60 lots?
So it's not the street, so like if you start on 11th right now, and I go that block, those will all be the 100 north. If I go to 12th, it'll be 200 north. If I go to 3, et cetera, et cetera. If I go to Utah, all the 100s occur between 100 and 200.
Oh, I
All the 200s.
understand that part of it.
Yeah, it's not changing the numbers on the streets, the only one changing will be the east-west address.
And so those address numbers will be the same. If it's 406, it'll still be 406. You're welcome, Claire.
Except where the numbers don't fit with the scheme, then they have to be changed.
All right, so at some point, somebody needs to be notified that whatever street it was is in brackets, that it has become this new number street. That should solve that problem.
So Councilman Mahan, there was some of that budget was not just signed, some of that was notifications and updates, et cetera, wasn't it?
Yeah, but most of it is $44,000 worth for signs alone. And then there was all the rest of the notifications and everything on top of that, so it's expensive, that's why we deferred it. Yeah.
When is it supposed to happen?
Yeah.
Teresa.
Somebody must have a sheet, cross-reference of aliases for the new addresses and the old addresses, if that helps, and then we should be able to move ahead with the project.
That would probably be easy enough on a database.
Yeah.
Spreadsheet.
Yeah, somebody must have it.
I think we could preemptively solve the problem that you're raising as a concern.
to do it.
He'll have a list.
Tom still hasn't provided me with the information I asked him for before because he's been busy on other things. And he knew that we deferred this, so, Tom has been very helpful and very cooperative.
So, let's do a little, see if he has that.
Yeah, I asked him for that.
Okay.
But I know he's been busy on other things, and we'll just defer it if it wasn't, I'll ask him again.
Beth, I think with the information I'm hearing, I'm comfortable leaving that as is in the budget. Are you okay with that?
I don't have an answer one way or the other. I think I'll talk to Lori a little bit after.
Okay, anything else on resort tax?
I think we should go for the extra 1% that the legislature approved, this year, and earmark that for the pool. It has to be project oriented, and if we added that 1% to the resort tax and earmark that for the pool, that would give us a start at least.
I'm not sure we can.
That's one of the things that the resort tax committee is looking into, yeah. I think we're looking at stormwater.
Let's get back to our line items.
I would just like to acknowledge, Councilman Mahan's suggestion, and I agree, we gotta look at that 1%. And so it's heard, and I think that the reserve tax should be out. No, the
Anything else on
1% I didn't
resort
say
tax?
before.
The only thing was is that we had budgeted large sums of money to the Hagen Water Project and the Force Main, and those did not come out of the resort tax. They're blank.
Oh, I just didn't. They have portion of that 141,000 is what's left over, or what has been paid out of that 242. Cause that was that restricted cash that was set up. I just missed that, apologize.
No, that's right.
But that's what is left in that restricted cash for the Hagen project that will be spent once the project is.
Okay.
So honestly, in the resort tax, there's a lot of things that will be paid off this year, and next year will be freed up.
Yeah, we might have to save it.
You want to move on to building code?
Jody's here.
Hang on. That's what I was thinking, these last ones go pretty good. So, nothing on building code?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was told that the building inspector was paid, his salary was paid directly from all permits for inspections, is that correct, or does it come out of the budget?
It's all out of his budget. The building department is strictly funded by building.
Oh, okay.
Gas tax?
What's that tax, why is it? What's that?
Taking out the.
Taking out the items.
Taking out what? The islands? Oh.
Yeah. We push them down the street, push them back, we make an island,
I just pushed them over to the
Yeah.
side.
The island. How about water?
I had a question on the gas. So I'm looking at last year's 62.9. We spent 46, and that the projected is 74. That's another one of those that is a significant jump.
Jim, do you want to speak on gas tax?
The gas tax comes from our street, that comes by the miles of our streets. And what they, well, I don't know where they get it from the state, how they figure it comes, but it goes up and down.
Yeah, so it's funded strictly from the gas tax.
I gas locally, fill up before you
It
go
has
to
nothing to
gas.
do with any of this general
base it
fund or
on-
anything, this comes directly from the gas taxes throughout the state. The state allocates this money by our miles of streets and what we do, and it is tied directly to, it has to go to streets. And
So let me rephrase the question. We had allocated 62,000, we spent 46, what happened to the difference?
The cash,
it's cash back.
so
in.
the cash goes back in there, and then you figure in the revenue of what you get in cash.
So
for
that again,
cash.
that's why this is.
So that's why the 74 gets to be 74. That is an allocated constrained fund, and that includes the leftovers from last year.
Correct, yeah, that, the leftovers goes into these funds. The general is.
So it rolls right into there.
Right, perfect. The general is kind of a different, because more funds in this one.
And-
Do you know, Lonnie, if it makes a difference if we buy our gas locally? Or is it,
It makes no difference.
it doesn't?
It's
Okay.
a statewide.
It makes a big difference.
If we want more money, we need more streets.
Yes, because it's based on your.
Okay,
I understood it was.
I did too.
I always made a point to fill up before I leave and drive on fumes
It's
when
not,
I'm
it's
getting
not
back.
good, they're local, it's statewide gas tax. And
Well, I'd just like to stop in and see those.
Our percent. But that doesn't mean don't buy locally.
Yeah.
We get local people.
Does this deal?
We buy all our fuel for our vehicles locally.
Does this deal with, replacing the pavement on the street periodically?
Periodically when there's enough, like we did White Avenue with that. There is another gas tax fund that they put in a year or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years, well, we've only gotten two.
Yeah. And what it is, it's tied into it, it has to come down as pavement or concrete on, that's what White Avenue is right now, so it's not that big of a fund, but over 2 years we will say, but we also have to have a matching fund to go with it. That's where you'll see we took money of the streets, and it can't come out of this gas tax, it has to come somewhere else in the budget, but you have to match the fund, then you can get that money and actually put, and that's what just did, that portion of White Avenue this last week was that other portion of gas tax available to the city, and you have to be able to match that fund, so we, in our budget, you see where we put that gas tax matching fund, so that we can receive that money, and so over a 3-year period, we were able to get enough to do that block of street.
Jim, I'm looking at the numbers, and this year's amount is significantly increased over last year's, and I'm seeing salaries are down, and I understand why that is, and we allocated that differently. One of the things you and I have talked about in the past is paint supplies, which is currently set at 500 and has some limits.
That's what?
So painting supplies is currently at 500, but there's a lot of other numbers that went up because there's no other way we got from 62 to 74 without making some numbers go up. Is there a possibility of increasing that painting supplies so we can address some of the concerns about painting, not on the state roads, but on our roads in the business district?
Well, painting what?
The yellow curves.
All the
and-
yellow curves?
I'm just, I know we're really constrained budget, but like I said,
We
here I'm
paint
seeing
the
something go up.
crosswalk Costs us $700 and some to get the paint for the crosswalk. I'm already over budget on paper. Just want to tell you that. I think the crosswalks are more important than the yellow corners. In the last 2 years since it's become a deal, I've kept a very good eye on these corners we talk about. And I really don't think it's a problem, because for 6 months of the year, they're covered with snow anyway. But we aren't having a parking problem, and I talked to the police chief, he knows. I don't think that's a top of the, deal that I need to get them corners painted, that it's creating a problem. We only have one street that has any curb to paint anyway. When you think about the city, there's not, we're talking about.
Is that Oaks?
2 or 3, oh yeah, Oaks, so.
Thank you.
And the county paints their own, don't they? Along the county building, don't they do that?
No,
Yes.
those are painted by the city,
Oh, are they?
they haven't been repainted for a long time.
Is the increase in gravel sand, is that snow?
That's,
Yeah,
that's
like
for sand.
$13,000 more than it was last year.
Because there's not much in the streets, so you can for that.
Oh.
But is that for the winter? Is that the gravel sand or is that
That's
for?
the sand, the
For
salt
the
for the
sand,
winter.
salt sand, and then
Okay.
whatever gravel we're out.
What explains the huge difference, however, between $1,800 and $1,900?
Because last year in the streets budget, we had more money and bought our sand and gravel through the streets budget.
Oh, okay.
So if it's available to be used from this, our preference would be to use it from this. Jim, correct me if I'm misspeaking. Our preference would be to use it from here, because if we can't use it specifically from the gas, then it has to come out of the general, which contributes to the other constraints.
And if you go back to streets, if you take out the wages and the hard payments of power and all the things like that, I have a total of $33,500 to spend on equipment, fuel, sand, my budget's cut in the streets budget. I don't have any excess money to spend on patch potholes, nothing, so, but the gas tax money, that's where I will use it to buy the sand, the gravel, just one thing of the emulsions for doing the patching on the potholes is $1,500. And then you have to buy the chips on top of it and haul them, so we're squeezed pretty tight to do anything other than plow, sand, and patch potholes.
Any more comments on gas tax? Move on to the water fund.
We already have a motion that we're bringing it over plus the salary and tax here.
Yeah, I can get all that.
Lonnie, well, there's a couple of things that we have talked about that we've just said we need to make notes. Will we need to make a motion, or can we just say as discussed and then have that without the individual motion?
Because overall, I mean, if you need to make a motion to amend any things, it needs to be on that resolution. But as far as the little small stuff that you guys have suggested, if the bottom line numbers don't change or anything, I can make the adjustments that you guys have asked for.
Water fund. Let's move into the sewer. Thank you.
I got a couple of sewer questions.
Okay.
On page 2 of the sewer, the stormwater master plan comes out of sewer. Is that because of the water that goes into sewer? And then the other one was on debt relief. Explain the $755,000.
Okay, so, going through our, reserve funds and the fact that they did not spend hardly any of the budget last year. They had quite a bit of a surplus in cash. So the cash part of it is covering, a lot of the extra stuff in here. So, discussing it with the auditors, there is this surplus after looking at reserves that were set aside a long time ago and stuff that are no longer needed, and then with the extra cash, we decided that it would be beneficial to put that towards knocking down some of those payments.
And that's one of the oldest ones, or the ones
The
that's way
longest,
out there.
yeah.
So 2040 something is what we're paying.
So it not only ends our obligations that much sooner and frees us up to make decisions, but also we're not paying interest. We'll save a lot of interest. We're paying off the house early.
My only other question is, should we be putting some of this money aside for vacation time for us? I just am asking because
But it
that's
would
kind of
only
the issue.
affect the people that are paid out of those funds. It wouldn't affect like the general fund.
Correct, yeah.
Which, I mean, if you
We
guys
could
wanna.
start. No, I just was, that's kind of the issue, so. But
That would be within the same
And
fund, wouldn't
so
it?
another.
It has to be because it's an enterprise fund.
But another thing too.
So it wouldn't change the resolution.
If you look at the very bottom, there are reserves in water and sewer. One is over 300,000. So those could be used for.
And those are capped at how much they can be still,
Not
right?
on,
That they
not on enterprising funds. On the general fund, yes, there's a cap, but enterprising funds there is not.
Did I hear you correctly that we actually paid off that debt in full, or that
No,
was?
it'll bring it down,
Okay, what's the balance? Do you know?
not right off the top of my head, no.
But I can say with high assurance.
It's a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, if we had the surplus like we did this year, we could possibly just pay it off.
Next year.
So,
If your sewer doesn't collapse, we don't have to replace it, we'll have to.
Nobody flush.
Everybody good with sewer? Solid waste?
I just laughed on that board.
All runs down.
I have a question on solid waste. Why, without them taking recycling, is Allied Waste charging us?
Because it's their increase that we get charged. It's like yeah.
And has anyone challenged that in any way, since they're literally taking X amount of dumpsters less?
We have a contract and I said that's.
But it's up next year, is it not?
Correct, so it's a discussion that the council will have to have.
Okay, I think it would be, since they're not taking all of that garbage, it might be nice to look at.
Anything else on solid waste?
But if was the contract, was recycling in the contract? Because if they're no longer a part of the fulfilling the contract, then maybe we can wiggle room the contract?
I don't think so, I think it was just one amount, and then every year they got tacked on a 3% increase. So we didn't get charged for everything. We didn't get charged for each bin that went out of private recycling.
No, but I mean, there was no written thing that meant that contract
It
included
was,
recycling?
it was not spelled out.
Robbie?
Yeah, like, my garbage can has about that much in the bottom of it each week. It isn't having to be hauled, it's going through the recycling center. You know, the big check, is that monthly that we send off to the public that you read off to you?
Yes,
That's
yeah.
monthly, $30,000. Yeah, what if all that was, we were recycling all that, instead of paying that 33,000, that's a good chunk of change.
And that money actually is put on our property taxes, and so it doesn't even, so
Well, yeah.
it's not gonna change the general fund.
We could still save it.
But I'm just saying that that's a separate account.
Yeah,
But-
yeah.
Okay, we're gonna move back to library, but we're gonna take a 10 minute.